I was always taught by my mentors is that you leave the personal stuff at the door. This is a business. There's no time for crying. There's no time for your personal drama. And I guess I just never investigated that or challenged that, Carrie, because once you get into it, and as you know, with multiple employees, like if you're having a bad day at home, you're probably having a bad day at work. And if you're having a bad day at work, you're probably bringing that home to your kids, your husband, your wife, and so on and so forth. So why not make business personal? Why does it have to be left at the door? So if you have this culture of feedback, the culture of putting it on the table, these trust accelerators in place, if you're going to go into the trenches with that person every day at work, why can't you just be like, Carrie, what's going on? Is there something you want to talk about? Is there anything I can do for you? And if you have this more open culture, you can have that discussion and move things along, or at least have a better understanding of what's going on in people's lives.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Carrie Siggins, and I'm so glad you are here today. Today, my guest is Scott Snider. He is the president of the Exit Planning Institute, also called the EPI, where they train, teach, educate, certify exit planning advisors, which are folks who help founders and business owners exit their business successfully, not just with money, but successfully. Like, what do I do with my life after I sell my business? He explains all about what the EPI does, and it's so much fun. I had the pleasure of meeting Scott when I went on his podcast, The Exit Is Now, last year, and I'm speaking at the Exit Planning Institute's annual conference down in Marco Island, Florida at the end of this month, where I get to talk about the ownership mindset and employee ownership as a great strategy for building culture and for exiting your business. So hang tight, and I will be right back with Scott. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am with Scott Snider, who I had the pleasure of getting to know when I went on his podcast, The Exit Is Now, in 2023, and we hit it off. And so I'm so excited to have you on my show today so that I can return the favor and pepper you with
Yeah.
all kinds of hard questions.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah. We had a blast when you were over in Cleveland with us. So I'm excited
Yeah.
to hang out on your show. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So you are the president of the Exit Planning Institute. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what that is and what your vision is for the organization. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you got there after you tell us
Okay,
about it.
sure.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So the Exit Planning Institute, we're an advisor facing organization. So we have 15,000 professional advisors across the United States and really across the globe. I think we're in about 18 other countries, but primarily here in the US. The professional advisors come to us for maybe one of maybe five different things. I would say the general theme is education, resources, tools, and a network or a community of like-minded advisors that are helping business owners grow value in their company and eventually position them for a sale, whether that's an internal sale or an external sale. So we have about 15,000 across the United States, and 5,000 of those advisors are what we call certified exit planning advisors or CEPAs. So again, looking for content, courses, conferences, a community of people that really all focus on helping owners grow something of significance while aligning business, personal, and financial goals. So that's who EPI is today. We were founded back in 2005 and been growing really ever since.
That's awesome. Now, I love that you talked about how to build value in the business. And I think that you believe that people should be working with CEPAs far before they're thinking about exiting so that they
100%.
can build that value. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of planning that far ahead, even if of an
Yeah.
owner or founder isn't thinking about exiting in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think that as business owners overall, so I owned my first business. I started my first business when I was 16, sold it when I was 24, and then basically took a year of what I always say wandering the earth to figure out what was next in my life. And then came into this business with my father, who was actually a member of the organization before we were owners. And that's a great lesson. My first exit planning lesson was that I had a good business. So business planning was good, had a pretty good financial personal financial plan for a young guy, but I really lacked personal planning. So when I sold my business, I quickly realized that I kind of let my business define who I was. So if I was always decentralizing my business over that maybe 9 or so year period, I would have been focusing on what was next in the next phases of my life. And so what we talk about at EPI is the difference between a successful company and a significant one. I think many owners, if I even ask you, Carrie, Do you feel proud of what you've done? Do you feel successful in what you've done? We have great people, great products, great services, great customers. We run a lean business, make good money. And I think many business owners are very proud of what they've built, very successful companies. And then when they go to sell their company, again, whether internal or external, they're kind of slapped across the face for the first time because somebody's in fact called their baby ugly. And they're shocked because they're like, wait a second, I've done everything that the books told me, the podcast, my business mentors, college, high school. I've done everything. I've focused on growing this solid company, strong P&L and L and strong balance sheet. What do you mean I don't have value in my company? And so we have this mindset, I think, over our business career that teaches us to grow income producing businesses. And we don't change that conversation to relate it over to value. And if we could go down a whole rabbit hole talking about exit planning, but as somebody young like me that's 40 years old, who's grown up through value acceleration, I can tell you it's really helped me to balance my life overall while decentralizing myself from my businesses. We all have other passions as well, and growing by 54 or 66% each year over the last several years. Beyond that, I might round that out with just simply saying is that we are human and things do happen, right? We teach something at EPI called the 5 Ds, these 5 destroyers of companies. And so, although we might have this very successful company, if we're not planning for a partner disagreement, a sudden death, a disability, it could really change the way that we're running our companies or, in fact, kill it. 50% of the exits in our country today are due to involuntary exits where the business owner is forced outside of their company. Whole kind of bunch of information there, but nonetheless, yeah, a very simple answer is I don't care if you're 25 years old just starting your company or 70 years old trying to more immediately exit. We do things in our company every single day that eventually affect our exit and our value.
Yeah, I love that. Great. Thank you for explaining that. It's such an important thing for founders to be thinking of, for business owners to be thinking of. How do I exit out of this and still build a sustainable company? How do I build a sustainable company without me?
Exactly right.
And that's not always to do, especially when you're in the nitty gritty of it. All right, let's talk about what you did before now, because you talked about starting your first company when you were 16 and you sold it when you were 24.
Yeah.
And that was in landscaping, right? What you owned had a
Yeah,
landscaping
totally. Yeah,
company?
totally opposite of what we do
Yeah,
today,
right?
right? I was in the khaki pants and the tucked in polo shirt, like planting the tree and mowing the lawn and doing stuff like that. So, yeah, we did really full service, right? So we had the landscape construction and landscape design, build, and maintenance. And then obviously being from the north here in Cleveland, Ohio, we had snow and ice management as well. So really full service, nice company. We had like 13 employees, 7 trucks, and maybe another 10 seasonal workers that came into the business during our busy times. But a really, really nice company. I actually went to horticulture school and the recession kind of hit and we took a dive a little bit. So we used to do what we would call high image oriented companies that use their property, use their image to sell their product or service. A high end luxury condo community, nursing and assisted living facility. We had all the Marriott hotels here in Northeast Ohio, things of that nature, wedding venues, stuff like that. And so when the recession hit, everybody cut their landscaping budgets back. And I always laugh because knowing what I know today, it's like the 101 level entrepreneurship course, industries you shouldn't get into, no barriers to entry, no licenses or certifications, very price sensitive. And I was doing so well that I was just like, yeah, no, wasn't preparing for any kind of recession. Recession hits, we get our budgets cut. And we struggled for a little bit, not like wildly bad, but certainly a struggle to the large national companies that came in, were able to do volume type contracts. We got an unsolicited offer from a competitor of ours that liked our people, our equipment, our contracts, the way we did things. And luckily, my dad's a certified exit planning advisor. So I knew a little bit more than the next guy about what it takes to exit a company. I remember sitting and asking dad, do you think we should take this? And he said, yeah, I mean, I think that looks like a pretty good deal. So we ended up taking it and transitioned over maybe a 6 month period. It was a small micro market company. And then that's when I entered the next phase of my life, was like wandering around Cleveland and the world for a little bit, trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. But nonetheless, yeah, I went from wearing the khaki pants and the polo shirt with grit under my fingernails to a very soft hand these days and like a polo shirt with this nice fancy pullover.
So let's talk a little bit about leadership. I
Sure.
mean, starting your own business when you are 16, not a lot of us really understand, grasp leadership. Maybe we're in leadership roles. I know that you're an athlete that requires leadership skills. Tell us a little bit about what your leadership style was like in those early
Oh,
days and how it's evolved.
I think we might have talked about this a little bit on my show too, because it's such a big transition for me.
Yeah.
My early mentors were baby boomer business owners or baby
Yeah.
boomer leaders. And I just think characteristically, it's not bad or good. It just kind of is. Through the 80s and 90s, there was a certain style of leadership. And now into the 2000s, 2024, you have this next generation of leaders and they grew up different and they want to be led differently. So I've always was taught to be a sponge, just like water is absorbed by a sponge. You're absorbing knowledge from your mentor. So I was very blessed to always have great mentors along the way. And so my leadership style, and in a previous kind of life too, could go way back to Scott in high school. At that same time I was starting my company, I had dead set on I was going to join the military. I wanted to leave the military from ROTC, maybe become a U.S. Marshal or a police officer, maybe go into law school thereafter. I say that because my style has always been kind of militant, or what I guess militant would be like. My buddies who are in the military always said, Scott, you'd make a really good drill sergeant. And that kind of worked in the hierarchy of my landscaping company. It was owner, general manager, foreman, and it was kind of like direct and take orders. And it really worked well for me. We grew fast. We had a nice company. But I wasn't very like empathetic. I wasn't very understanding. It was very just bark orders, make it happen, take the guys out to the bar after the end of the shift, do it all again the next day, right? Then when I got into EPI, particularly fast forward through EPI a little bit just recently to our pandemic, I was still in that kind of militant barking orders culture, but with people that are highly educated, very holistic minded. And now people that are at EPI, I'm like the old guy at 40. Most people are 20s and 30s. So again, totally different generations, but younger end of the Gen X and through the millennials want to be led in a very different way inside of our business today. And it wasn't until really our pandemic that kind of talk about getting slapped across the face kind of really sat me back in my chair to figure out who we are and who we want to be. We literally ripped the plaque of core values off the wall and redid the whole thing during COVID because we rediscovered who we were and became a little bit more holistic. I always say it's like rainbows and butterflies a little bit for me. It's a little soft these days for me, but it's really just an intentional and deliberate change. What I think I learned is that growing our business is more about the people than it is at the expense of people. And so it was a humbling experience going through leadership, some leadership training, some transformational leadership training type stuff, putting some new core values up on the wall that we actually lived and can show examples by. And I'd like to think that I've embraced some of that kind of gritty and direct that I used to have with a much more like kind of empathetic and holistic way of living, which has really helped me to decentralize myself. So back in February, first time in my entire business career that I took 30 days away from the business. I probably really took 3 weeks. And that first week, I was still pretty active. And then I got deeper and deeper into the hole where I was like, oh man, I don't really have to do anything because my executive leaders have really taken the reins. And the average age of the executive leadership team here at EPI is probably like 3 years old. So pretty young group, but it's been a pretty big 4 years for me for sure in terms of leadership.
How about feedback? If you're the kind of person who barks orders and that drill sergeant, it might not always feel safe to give you feedback. Do you feel like you are much more able to accept feedback? What is your relationship with feedback and how do you get it?
Yeah.
And make sure that you don't get into drill sergeant mode when you do get something you don't want to hear.
I think that we're really good at it now. So it was pretty interesting during pandemic as we started to change our culture. We did our first ever anonymous employee survey where we asked them several questions and then ended up saying, look, at the end of the day, what would you rank our culture from 1 to 6, which is our scale that we use in teaching at EPI. 6 being perfect, 1 being the worst. But in the 6 scale, there's no average. So when you feel like, I might be average, I'm either 3 slightly below or 4 slightly above. So 2020, our employees rated us a 3.2, so slightly below average. As we ended last year, we now ranked at a 5.24. And I lead with that because it takes a while to get there. And I think feedback really starts with building an environment of trust and respect. So once you get that and you get to know people, there may be two other things that really stick out to me in terms of accepting and giving feedback. One, we always say deliver the mail to the right address. So if me and you have an issue, but I'm over there talking to this other employee, John, he's not the issue, you're the issues. And then we also have another one that's actually put up on the core values. It's the number one core value out of the 7 that we have. And it's called put it on the table. We might have just seen this around the holiday time, right? There's all kinds of awkwardness sometimes around the Thanksgiving or the Easter or the Christmas table because our family has so much drama that we just throw it under the table. Man, we don't really want to talk about it. But once you pull it out from under the table and put it on the table, it just opens up your environment to a whole new world. Now, none of that really works if you go spend some time getting to know somebody and trusting and believing in them. But I would say when I look at feedback, it's certainly a two-way street. I always thought I was very accepting of feedback, but I felt my perception wasn't my reality because everybody around me was like, I don't want to talk to Scott because he's kind of a tough dude. But once you build that and then again surround yourself with core values, it actually becomes quite natural. But you have to have trust accelerators too. It took probably 2 years for us to surround ourselves with those. And once we embrace those, now we just have a culture of delivering the mail to the right address and putting things on the table. So the feedback process actually comes quite easy along the way.
Yeah, I love that. We call it keep it real here because that's what we all want, right? I like it. Put it on the table, keep it real. Let's just be real. We're all human beings here and we all benefit from feedback. But if you just sweep it under the rug, all you get is a lumpy rug.
The only
And you know
thing
what you do? You trip over lumpy rugs.
you're never gonna get anything done. I always say too, another thing that was a big epiphany, I guess, for me in the same time frame was I was always taught by my mentors is that you leave the personal stuff at the door. This is a business. There's no time for crying. There's no time for your personal drama. And I guess I just never investigated that or challenged that, Carrie, because once you get into it, and you, as you know, with multiple employees, like if you're having a bad day at home, you're probably having a bad day at work. And if you're having a bad day at work, you're probably bringing that home to your kids, your husband, your wife, and so on and so forth. So why not make business personal? Why does it have to be left at the door? So if you have this culture of feedback, the culture of putting it on the table, these trust accelerators in place, if you're going to go into the trenches with that person every day at work, why can't you just be like, Carrie, what's going on? Is there something you want to talk about? Is there anything I can do for you? And if you have this more open culture, you can kind of have that discussion and move things along, or at least have a better understanding of what's going on in people's lives.
Yep, totally agree. We are our whole selves. And that is such a, 80s and 90s way of managing,
It is.
right?
It is.
Yeah, leave your personal stuff at the door. Like it's just, yeah, it's so unfulfilling when you have to
Yeah.
pretend to be somebody else at work and when
Yes.
you can't be authentic, and having a rough time, having a bad day. I'm going through some stuff and it does affect your performance. And if you have a leader who can understand that and help you get through it, it's just such a much better place to work.
I could tell you it's quite tiring too, because so Gino Wickman is the founder of EOS Worldwide. And first time I saw him speak, I saw myself on stage with him. He was in a keynote and he said, my wife threw me a 40th birthday party or 50th, I forget what it was, but she threw me a big birthday party and it was a surprise. I walked into this room and they made me go up on this little stage and say a few words. And he said it was the first time in my life that I had everybody in my life all in one room. And I looked across the stage at these round tables that everybody was sitting at. And I said to myself, who am I going to be today? Because he's about to say a few words on his big 40th birthday party, but he looked over here and he saw his family. He looked over here, he saw his employees. He looked over here, he saw his leadership team. He looked over here, saw his golf buddies. He looked over here, saw his kids, friends that are on the baseball team and the music shows and stuff like that. And he said, there's like 6 or 7 groups there, and I'm a different person in every single group. So that's what I say. Just a way better way of living where you could just come into the office that you're going to spend 8, 10 hours at every day and just be who you are when you're at the ball game or when you're sitting in your basement watching a show or whatever it might be. Just show up the way who you are. And once I learned that was a big part of my leadership transformation. You kind of get who you get. And I could tell you, I was Gino. I have had that same exact experience. And it is literally mentally exhausting where I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, personal Scott off. I just got home from the NASCAR race and the RV trip. So that guy set aside. Now I'm prim proper business Scott. And I was like, what a exhausting task. No wonder my wife is like, dude, why are you so tired after work? I'm like, because I had a whole nother game on. So not to say that you don't polish yourself up in certain scenarios, right? NASCAR Scott is a little less polished than church Scott with his mother, but nonetheless, you're pretty much getting the same guy.
I love that. It's so important. I think people want real leaders. And part of our issue in the United States is that we put these leaders on a pedestal and they're not real. They're not showing up as their authentic selves. They do have this persona and it's not real. And so then we're so disappointed when we learn differently, or they feel like they have to put this facade on
Yes.
because I can't be who I really am. And I've learned over my 17 years of running Stone Age that people just appreciate a real person. I always say, like, your title, just a bunch of letters behind your name, like CEO, like,
Yeah.
it's just some letters. I'm a human being and I have a role to play in this company. And my job is to play it to the very best of my ability, just like an individual contributor would in any position in the company. It's just letters behind the name. And that allows you to just connect on the realness of being human and just trying to figure this whole thing out rather than like, oh, well, I'm the CEO, so I have to put on this face because otherwise my employees won't respect me. And
Exactly.
it just
At,
simply isn't
at
true.
today's leadership, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
I think the people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they see right through that now. And they're like, oh man,
Yeah.
that's not Carrie. I actually saw Carrie out on the golf course, or I saw her at the NASCAR race, or I saw her at the movies the other day. That's not how she really is. I think they
Yeah.
see right through it now. So it's actually kind of hard to hide.
Yep. Agreed. So how does vulnerability play in that for you, right? Because coming in with that more of that
Yeah.
authoritarian command and control, like there's not a lot of room for vulnerability. How has that played out for you as you've transformed as a leader?
I could tell you it's like that. What is that kind of basic saying that we always hear? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I
Yeah.
could tell you that still to this day, I think we've embraced this kind of transformational leadership concepts in our core values, but it's not to say that it's not uncomfortable or easy. So I would say that for me, maybe it's a little bit, easier than the next because I'm more of a kind of an open book, or certainly more so today than I've ever was. But you take my dad, right? So my dad's middle 60s, a baby boomer business owner, baby boomer leader that came out of big corporate and then into the micro market kind of leadership and companies. Dad doesn't really like peeling back the layers of the onion, looking under the sheets. He's like, this is who I am and this is how I look. And I definitely don't want to look weak. Don't make me look weak. So if I'm sick, I'm pushing through it and I'm coming to the office. Don't tell anybody. I think it's difficult, but again, difficult in the sense of what is the framework that you're operating it within. So if you build a culture of trust, we have some trust accelerators that we all believe in. We have a culture of putting it on the table. We have a culture of delivering the mail to the right address. We understand that in order to get the whole company and organization forward, we have to open up sometimes, and it's not going to be all that easy. But again, it goes back to what we were just talking about. It's very authentic and human. But I would say for me, that's probably the hardest part. I'm actually getting a little weirded out even thinking about it because it's like, oh man, they're going to really have to know about that. Really, like that's so embarrassing. But it goes back. Like I also went, Carrie, to 13 years of private Catholic school where you were just like prim and proper. I had the tie on in high school, went to all boys school, and you're like very prim and proper. So you're always trying to look your best. But again, I think it's just totally different in today's world now that people don't want the best because that's not how life is. They'd rather meet the CEO that says, man, me and her, even though I might be the part time hourly employee, me and her have the exact same type of issues. That's so interesting. And then you have this cool connection. Now imagine you blast that out to 50 people or 100 people across the entire organization. But nonetheless, being vulnerable is certainly an element or a task or a trait that I still work on daily, no doubt.
Yeah. I remember when I decided to tell my executive team about my past substance abuse issues and almost overdosing back in 2006. And
Yeah.
I carried so much embarrassment and shame around it. And some people knew, but certainly not at work.
Yeah.
And we were doing a
Right.
team building session and we were having these vulnerable stories. And I thought, this is the time I need to tell people because it was a massive pivot point in my life, an inflection point. It changed everything for me
Hmm.
in so many ways, even though it was the darkest moment of my life. And so I told them, and my heart was racing and was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. It felt so risky. But what happened afterwards was amazing because then another person said, well, I wasn't going to tell this story, but since you just shared this, I'm going to share it. And so he shared a deep story about a family member and very, very personal to him. And then it just opened up this deeper vulnerability for everyone. And we were so connected and it changed everything about the team. And that's when I realized the power of that vulnerability. Like, we
Yeah.
think that we're going to be judged. And there are certainly people who judge me for my past. And I understand that. But the connection that I built with the people who matter the most in my life, because I was finally
100%.
just honest about
Yeah.
it made such a huge difference. And I know that me sharing my story had changed the way people viewed me in a positive way. I had an employee call me from Las Vegas in trouble. He got drugged at a strip club
Oh my
and
gosh.
signed
Oh
his credit
no.
card over and they took everything.
Oh,
And he called me and he was suicidal.
oh my God.
And I talked him off the ledge, literally, and got him home. And
Yes.
then we put together a plan. And it actually wound up being like this crime circle that all of
Yeah.
these strip clubs were involved in. And
Right.
he got all of his money back and more because he was part of this like class
Yeah.
action
Right.
suit.
Yeah.
But is because I helped him. And he said, I didn't know who else to call, but I knew that you would understand that.
Yeah. Like I knew the
And
story.
so people are like, "Oh my god, that's crazy." An employee calls you, he's like in trouble, but he might not be alive today. if he wouldn't have felt safe to call me and know that I could actually help get him home.
Yeah.
And that is worth it all. If my story just saved that one person's life because I was vulnerable in my company to tell people, then it's worth it.
Well, it started, right? I think that's a true trait of a leader, right? Is that it started with you. And so when you ask me about vulnerability or even the stuff like put it on the table and having this kind of a culture of feedback, if that's the kind of company you want to have, it's going to have to start with you. I remember in 2020, 2020 was a tough time, right? Because we do in-person programming. You can imagine in your world, if you make something and you don't have any trains, boats, planes, cars to get it anywhere, you just have a warehouse full of stuff. And you have a bunch of people that have bought stuff and you can't get it there. So similar to us, in March and April, we had maybe 300 people coming to our credentialing program, but no way to deliver because we had in-person programming. We went 2 months with no revenue, but I had looked at my dad, and me and dad are basically 50-50. He's 51%, I'm 49% owner. I said, Dad, I think we need to pony up this cash though, because there's something missing here. I want to enter into this transformational leadership program that we were debating on going through. And I just tell you that story because when we jumped into this transformational leadership training, it was with 11 of my core people. We have almost 35 people now. So that's how much we've grown since 2020. But I knew that there was something missing still when we kind of popped out in the summertime of 2020. So we entered this transformational leadership training, and it wasn't anything like any of the traditional trainings that we've gone through. It was kind of like therapy where people were getting stuff out and just talking about who they were and some of the issues that they had. And by me just talking about what was going on in my life, because I also had a really horrible breakup that had gone on for me in 2020. Like my world was literally just shaking and I was trying to build back. And I just was open with all of my team about that. And what I realized in my business that helped us change is that all 11 people, given this is maybe 2 months into these sessions, said, Scott, we have something to talk to you about. The culture was so bad at your business that all 11 of us were looking for jobs.
Mm,
So think about that information from an owner and leader standpoint. I was like, holy shit, like if 11 people leave my business, I don't have a business anymore because it's just me. And so we were able to dissect that. And I think 2 people ended up finding something else to do, but the 9 people that were in that original group are still here today. They're the people that you met when we hung out here in Cleveland. But think about that, being vulnerable, being open, and a
mm.
culture of feedback, a culture of personal and professional growth. Literally, it's changed who we are as a company, just like it changed that guy's life and your story.
Yeah. That's a tough thing to hear.
Oh,
Everybody in your company wants to leave.
and you met some of my team, like those original 9, and some of those are like my close personal friends, like Josh, who's in charge of our strategic relationships. I was the best man in his wedding. I've known Jocelyn and Paige, our 2 other directors, for almost nearly 15 years, and I see them outside of work. So you can imagine how awkward and tough that was for them to tell me. I think I just finished up that conversation and took a seat back, and then my dad's relatively decentralized from the business. So I had to get off that call and go over to dad and say, Dad, we got a real serious issue. So first, thank God that we spent the 200 grand taking our team through this professional development when we had no revenue. It's weird how the universe works, right? When we had no revenue coming in, but a bunch of expenses to pay, we're like, let's spend another 200 grand and go through this program. And that was immediately, that's when it was like, okay, the next session that we had, and I think some meetings leading up to the next formal session, we said, let's dissect that, guys. Like, I love those. They're like my friends. "Well, how is it this bad?" And they're like, well, it's this, it's this, it's this. It's that militant barking orders. You leave work not happy. And then I go home and my husband or my wife are like, dude, what's your problem, man? Like,
Yeah.
well, my job is sucks. And they're like, well, just quit. And they're like, I can't quit. We do have a good overall thing going. And I love Scott. I would say out of the 9 that stayed, 5 of them were close personal friends. It's kind of weird how the universe works sometimes because without their personal relationship, they probably would have just left.
Yeah.
But because we knew each other outside, they stuck around a little bit longer maybe than they should. But thank God. And then they tugged along the other 4 because they're like, Scott's a good guy. He's just lost right now. But again, going back to a vulnerable culture of feedback, that was the catalyst for us. It's like rip the values down. And that was it when I was like, okay, clearly an issue here. I got to investigate myself first. And so I did.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I just read a article, I think it was in Fast Company, and people are getting divorced at unprecedented rates. This was focused on Gen Xers, but I
Yeah,
certainly know plenty of millennials who are going through divorces,
100%.
and a big cause of it is workplace stress.
Mhm.
And our leadership styles, it has such a ripple effect. It's like, man, if I'm creating an environment where people are so stressed that they are getting divorced because it's ruining their relationships at
Horrible.
home,
Right. You don't want
And no way. I don't want to build that kind of company.
that. No.
Anyway, I just found it really fascinating. And I believe leaders need to take responsibility for that. What kind of culture are you creating?
Yeah, I totally agree. As we've grown from those 11 employees to our 35th employee, and we're growing to 54 employees, I have learned as a leader how much people replicate and model your behavior more so than
Yeah.
ever before. And so, yeah, you see it. So I think for many leaders, you got to keep that top of mind, particularly if you do have the younger end of the millennials working for you too, that might just be a year or two into their careers. They will start to model the culture that you have, whether for good or for bad. And so, no, as a person that has been divorced and now remarried, as a person that has been there, I certainly don't want to be a culture of that. Like, what a horrible thing, right? Like, what a
Yeah.
horrible, horrible thing. Yeah.
I'm with you. All right. One last question before we
Sure.
wrap things up here.
Yeah.
You have a really young executive leadership team, right? The average is
Yeah.
32 or
33 or
33,
30,
you
yeah,
said. So
something like
you've
that. Yeah.
got, a few old guys like you.
Yeah. Right.
And obviously some people who are younger than that. And, there's such that stigma. I think every older generation always says, oh, this younger generation, da 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 da, and some
Mhm.
of those things might be true. And a lot of it's just painting people with broad brush strokes of
Yes.
stereotypes. But I am curious because I know this question had to come up of like, what is it like to have such a young leadership team? And do you buy into any of those stereotypes that millennials and that Gen
Yeah.
Zers are really getting since you have such a young leadership team?
I can tell you for me, it's certainly challenging, right? I think that because again, I went to horticulture school and dropped out. So I don't even have a college degree. So the people that surround me on our particularly our executive leadership team, I'm like always challenged. Like coming up today at 2 o'clock, we'll have a 2 hour executive leadership meeting where we'll solve problems and do all that. And I'm always kind of like floating backwards in the corner, like, wow, like what a stimulating conversation. I'm like taking tons of notes and everything. So it's been really cool to see the different versions. So I don't know if I buy into the stereotypes, but I do like understanding generations. If you look at research, not just stereotypes, but actual research, generations have general characteristics. So, for example, you take my dad, who's certainly a boomer, maybe a couple of things that stand out for me and dad that our leadership team, very young folks, shouldn't just give him crap about. They should just understand him and the way he thinks. So, dad at 66 years old, he is the inventor of the 60-hour work week. They believe in rolling up the sleeves and making it happen. He's the guy that's like, dude, I'm sick as hell, but I'm still coming into the office to make it happen. And he's very proud about that because his core value in life generally is success. So whether that's his business, his marriage, his faith, his golf game, he wants to feel success within it. So those are two critical characteristics to know when you're working with a boomer. Now, if you go down into the Gen X, call it 44 years old to 59 years old, these people believe in a work-life balance. They want to work smarter, not harder, typically through use of technology. They value their time. So if I'm trying to take a person that's 44 or 50, likely, and I'm saying, hey, man, you got to crank 60 hours a week. I can't believe you're taking so much time off. That's going to totally rock their world because they're like, wait a second, I can get my job done in 35 hours. And I like to blend and balance because I got little kids home. So knowing that. And then millennials, I would say two things, and maybe one that in terms of leadership that certainly stands out is they are very ambitious. I think super entrepreneurial, maybe as entrepreneurial or more entrepreneurial than the baby boomers, but they are not very focused. So you get people like me, frankly, that are like visionary. So I got all kinds of friggin' ideas and they're never framed. And they're like, well, Scott, how do I put it together? So just knowing that. And those are facts. They're not pure for every single person, but I'm sure in those age groups, those generations, they have some type of what their generation kind of stands for, means characteristically. So for me, I was just having this debate with my 80-year-old uncle yesterday over some glasses of wine. And because at our company, we have unlimited vacation. So my uncle, who works in a factory since he was 18, he's 67. And my other uncle, who's 80, they're like, this is freaking crazy. You young people don't even want to work anymore. And I'm like, hey, man, I would challenge you to give me 30 days. Each of us do a similar job. I could probably do it quicker, faster, and higher quality and get it done in half the time. You don't need 60 hours. And what's your life like outside? He's 80. He's my great uncle. My great aunt has passed away. He's trying to figure out what to do in life. So think about that. He's 80 years old and he's like, who am I outside of my job? What a shame to realize it when you're 80. So, anyways, my point being is I don't think it's bad or good. That was my point to my family in this debate yesterday over a glass of wine. I said, look, I think that you just look around the table and say, look, these people in their 20s and 30s probably have some characteristics that are like them and then value some things. These people in their 30s and 40s different, and these people in their 50s and 60s different. So knowing all of that, how can we work better together as a team? Because those are just facts. So embrace those things, not good or bad. It just is. I don't care that my dad invented the 60-hour work week. It's just that's how he thinks. So let's kind of combine it together. So I don't know if I don't necessarily believe in deep stereotypes, but I do believe in facts and research. And I'm saying, how do we use that to blend a culture? But so that's
I love
top
it.
of mind for me when I get into one of these big leadership meetings, no doubt.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks for sharing those stories.
Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, so last question, and then we'll ask how people can find you.
Sure.
The name of this podcast is Reflect Forward. What does Reflect Forward mean to you?
Yeah, I always like that podcast name. To me, I guess in my own way, we call it purposeful growth. For me, it's like very similar for that. I think that it became one of those 7 core values. And so I think that for whether it be personal or professional, we should always be reflecting, building, evolving, and growing in both ways. Again, personal and professional. So when I think about reflect forward, I think about slowing down to speed up. And I think about making a deliberate and intentional effort to better yourself and better your business. That's what I think.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, of
All
course.
right, how can people find you?
Sure. The easiest way, and maybe 2 ways. So just go to earncepa.com. So that's earn, and then CEPA is CEPA, stands for Certified Exit Planning Advisor. So earncepa.com. That'll just take you to the website. You can poke around over there, or just go to LinkedIn, type in Scott Snider, and I try to share kind of the stuff that we're talking about. I talk about authentic, which kind of share different stories and relate it back to my journey as a business owner in exit planning. So if you just look up Scott Snider on LinkedIn, you can find me there.
Awesome, and I'll include all that in the show
Cool.
notes.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, it has been so awesome to spend this last half an hour with you, and I can't wait to see you at the end
Yeah.
of the month when I'm down there speaking and
Yeah.
doing author showcase and panels and all kinds of fun stuff with you all.
Who knew that you would be hanging out and I'd meet you very like briefly like that, and then we'd be like, well, I was like, dude, if Carrie wants to hang out for 3 days in Marco Island, I'm gonna bring her down there for sure. You're gonna love it. It's a great crowd. Hopefully, you don't get too
Can't wait.
bombarded.
Yeah,
As a
it
non-advisor, they will love your story.
I
So,
love it. Well, I can't wait. I'm so
thank you.
excited. It made sense since I've got to be in Tampa for the NCEO
Yeah,
conference and board meeting. So it was like flying to Florida from Durango, Colorado is not an easy thing to
I would
do.
assume.
And so it's like, going back and forth. No, I'll just hang out with you guys.
Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks. All right. Hang tight, everybody. I'll be right back. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Scott. He's so much fun. And I just see so many synergies between what he's doing at the Exit Planning Institute and what we're doing at the Commission for Employee Ownership here in Colorado. And I just recently joined the board of the National Center for Employee Ownership, the NCEO. And I just think it makes sense to be working with certified exit planning advisors on how to advise founders and business owners looking to exit on employee ownership, because it is such a great way to transfer your company to the people who are building value in it, employees, and really start to address the issue that we have with the ever increasing wealth gap here in the United States. And employee ownership is a great way to build a great company and to help transfer some of that wealth to the middle class, to the people who are building companies. I look forward to a lot more collaboration with Scott as we are doing things in our respective organizations. All right, with that, I will leave you to your day. If you like this podcast, please write a review, share it with a friend, subscribe to it on your favorite podcast platform or on my YouTube channel. It always helps with the algorithms that it gets these great interviews out there to the world. And don't forget to pick up a copy of my book, The Ownership Mindset. You can find it on my website, carriesiggins.com, or just go to Amazon and type in The Ownership Mindset and you will be able to find it there. It's on Audible, Kindle, and in hardback copies. All right, take care. We'll see you next week.